inquiry and no independent verification of the IRS's narrative there. We know the IRS lied about the targeting of conservative groups, the targeting of Americans who disagreed with the Obama administration and with the government generally. So the administration and the Obama IRS has already a record of lying about what its activities are. And they knew about these records, at least back in February, were not available, or so they're telling us. And they withheld that information from Congress, and the commissioner testified repeatedly since then, and in no way suggested that there were records that were not accessible. So the gamesmanship that went on with Congress has led to the skepticism, which is widespread, according to a Fox News poll, which shows, I think, 76% of Americans think the emails were purposely destroyed. So this is not a Republican or Democratic thing. This is an American thing. They don't trust the IRS.
Well, it should be. It should be an American thing, but unfortunately, it seems like the Democratic Party is more than willing to block any sort of real investigation here. Now, apparently the National Archives has said that there is an actual law breaking here in getting rid of the emails without notifying anybody. The IRS law itself suggests that they're supposed to provide for backup and recovery of records, specifically to protect against information loss or corruption. Tom, what should be the next steps here? Because we're looking here at what is a historic obstruction of justice on the part of the IRS. And they're not just obstructing justice on this. Yesterday, we had on John Eastman from the National Organization for Marriage, which just won a $50,000 settlement against the IRS.
Right.
And the story that he's telling is absolutely shocking about not only the IRS refusing to, not only the Department of Justice refusing to prosecute the IRS for leaking personal and confidential tax information to third parties, but the DOJ refusing to even grant immunity so that they can find out who in the IRS is responsible for this in the first place. When you have this sort of obstruction of justice, when you have this sort of corruption, this sort of criminality, what exactly should the American people be expecting folks on the Hill to do?
Well, they should demand a appointment of a special counsel separate and apart, within reason from the Department of Justice, which is terribly conflicted here because DOJ is involved in the IRS scandal. The FBI is involved in the IRS scandal. Lois Lerner was collaborating with the FBI and the DOJ about possibly prosecuting the same people the IRS was suppressing. So they're completely conflicted out. Congress has got to decide whether this is an important issue. Should they have a select committee? Should they just essentially stop all IRS funding until there is an independent criminal investigation that the American people can have confidence in? Should they impeach lower-level officials or higher-level officials over this? If this was a private entity that had belatedly admitted in the course of a government investigation that documents were destroyed, the FBI would have gone over and raided the offices. That's what should have happened with the IRS as soon as this became disclosed. And Congress, by the way, is at fault here. You've got these games the committees are playing about who the IRS commissioner is going to testify to first. They've been fooled with time and time again with little to no consequence. They say they found out in February. That's an interesting timing because that's when they started searching for and producing documents in response to Judicial Watch's Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that uncovered some key IRS documents. I mean, my gosh, if we hadn't sued, would we never know about this document destruction? This is an indictment of the failure of oversight in Congress, and the American people have finally got to understand there's no law in this town. And if they're interested in law being in this town, they need to pressure their Congress, and they need to understand that unless Congress takes strong action, nothing's going to get done. But, of course, in the meantime, we're going to continue our independent investigations. There are private litigants who are suing the IRS for documents and suing the IRS over the misconduct. Maybe the courts can get involved independent of any DOJ or congressional noise-making.
Yeah, well, Tom, this is sort of what I've proposed in terms of a solution, because it seems that groups like Judicial Watch the work of the National Organization for Marriage on similar topics in response to some of the documents that Judicial Watch was able to uncover. It seems like private entities are significantly more successful at this point at checking the overreaches of the executive branch than members of the legislature. And that being the case, should Congress be looking at this point to broaden the law to allow for more civil suits against members of the executive branch? Because it just seems, I wrote a column today in which I essentially stated that we are now living in what looks like an executive dictatorship. Congress doesn't do anything. If the President of the United States or his underlying regulators decide to target somebody, they'll just go ahead and do it, and nobody says a damn thing until it's all over and done, at which point we're told that there's nothing we can do because the DOJ won't do anything.
Well, and I don't necessarily dispute that. The rub is that Congress exempts itself from these types of litigation. FOIA, Congress is exempted from, and when Lois Lerner communicating with anyone in the Democratic Senate or the Democratic Congress and generally about targeting conservatives and Tea Party groups, those are the types of emails that would be disappearing. So it's no surprise to me that members of the Hill, especially Democrats, are not terribly interested in pursuing this issue too far. We've got to broaden accountability in addition to allowing more lawsuits. For instance, there's a good. It looks like they're Democrat and Republican Cornyn and Pat Leahy are trying to significantly broaden the Freedom of Information Act to allow people to get access to more information. Ben, we're losing our self-government. Congress is averting its eyes. It's signing blank checks to the executive branch. The president thinks he doesn't have to follow the law. The federal agencies have contempt for the right to know and just do whatever they want and regulate legislate through regulation. And they don't want to tell the American people what they're doing or why they're doing it. And it's frankly only these laws that provide accountability. It's the only way we're going to be able to grab back our ability to govern ourselves. We really got to take action ourselves.
We're speaking with Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch, who's done unbelievable work in uncovering all the various scandals of the Obama administration. Tom, who's been kicking back against the broadening of FOIA law in Congress? Because that's such an obvious thing that has to be done. The idea that we need to be given more information about what's going on, given the fact that we have an executive branch that is now 3 million large, and in which there is no accountability. I mean, despite all of the documents that you've uncovered, nobody has lost their retirement package. Nobody has been prosecuted in any of the scandals upon which you've actually uncovered documents, from the IRS to Benghazi to the scandals over at the EPA. It never seems like it comes home to roost. So who are the bad guys in Congress that we should be fighting, and who are the good guys in Congress we should be backing on this?
Well, Pat Leahy and John Cornyn have taken some leadership on FOIA issues, and a hardcore liberal Democrat and a establishment Republican. So those are guys that you can figure out what they're doing and see if you want to support that. I don't think there are too many people opposed to transparency in government in Congress, but we'll see as this bill proceeds. I think it's being just only now introduced. But administrations don't like too much transparency. And I think a fun thing for movement people to think about and the concerned Americans to ask questions about is, why isn't Congress subject to transparency laws? Right. I mean, it seems like nobody is subject to any transparency whatsoever, and that's increasingly disturbing. Now, Tom, have you been following the lost emails over at the EPA? I know that's just broken, but have you been following? Darrell Issa said that they've tried to serve subpoenas on former employees over at the EPA. They've asked for the failed hard drive from individuals who are now in New Zealand and never seem to be returning. It just seems to be getting more and more absurd throughout all of this. Number one, have you been following what's going on with the EPA on this case of missing emails? And number two, the Obama administration itself. Let's say that Tom Fitton was suddenly in charge of leading up the legislative effort in Congress. Who's the number one official that you'd be looking to either impeach or prosecute or sue? In the Obama administration? Yes. Well, President Obama, if it was a normal government and we had a normal political system, he would have resigned over the IRS scandal. Impeachment's practically speaking off the table because the Senate Democrats would control an impeachment trial. But impeachment is the constitutional vehicle for keeping in check government abuse by officials who are sworn to uphold the Constitution. And, people like President Obama, Eric Holder, and those who are violating their oaths those ought to be the subject of impeachment inquiries. But politically, Republicans aren't going to want to do that. So short of impeachment, we should demand that we have a Congress that is willing to put their money where their mouths are in terms of cutting off funding and using all the powers, the legislative powers, which are significant constitutionally, to police the executive branch. There's not a dollar that falls from the sky in Washington, in theory, that is not appropriated or approved by Congress. And that's an awesome power, and it's a power given to the people by by our founding fathers, and it resides with the legislature, and it's about time they start exercising it.
Tom Fitton is of Judicial Watch. He's written the book, The Chronicles, the Corruption Chronicles, which is a New York Times bestseller. And he's also the guy behind the new movie, District of Corruption. Tom, thanks for doing all the work that you're doing. Keep doing it, and we will obviously continue to report on the documents that you uncover from what has to be the most corrupt administration in American history at this point.
Yeah, well, certainly since Nixon, that's for sure.
As we continue here on the Ben Shapiro Show, we'll get a little bit deeper into the IRS scandal. And why is it that even some Democrats are starting to turn on their own IRS? Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770 KTTH, KTTH.com. The IRS scandal continues to spiral out of control for the Obama administration, and it's just getting uglier and uglier. Not only are the emails now missing from the IRS, as we mentioned earlier with Tom, the emails are now missing from the EPA as well. I mean, you wonder exactly what records the Obama administration has kept, considering how stealthy they are about their own records. This goes all the way back to the beginning of the Obama administration, when they said that they were going to release all of the White House logs. You remember that? And then they proceeded to not release all of the White House logs. You had to submit requests as to who you thought had attended the White House. And then they refused to confirm or deny whether certain figures were who they said they were. So Hillary Rosen, for example, the Democratic strategist, after she was on national television explaining that Ann Romney had never worked a day in her life, Jay Carney tried to deny that Hillary Rosen had been to the White House. This is what they do. They are obstructionists. Well, the EPA apparently has now confirmed to the House Oversight Committee that her staff is unable to provide lawmakers all the documents they requested on Pebble Mine in Alaska because of, you guessed it, a computer crash. And the committee suspects that Philip North, who worked for the EPA in Alaska, decided with his colleagues to veto the proposed Pebble Mine near Bristol Bay in 2009 before the agency even started researching its potential impacts on the environment. Committee staffers have been trying to interview North, but he's in New Zealand and won't cooperate. Shocker. Darrell Issa says that somebody's going to get held in contempt. Only one problem. Nobody cares about contempt. Eric Holder's been in contempt for 3 years under Fast and Furious, and nothing has happened to him. Representative Mark Meadows has said that the EPA violated the Federal Records Act by not backing up North's emails. He said, it looks like the Federal Records Act has been violated by the EPA. Did he preserve his emails? That's required by the Federal Records Act. McCarthy, the woman who runs the EPA, she said, we may have some emails we cannot produce that we should have kept. Shocker. Meanwhile, on the IRS scandal, Marco Rubio taking the lead for the Republicans, ripping into the media and saying, look, guys, if this were a Republican, you'd never stop talking about it.
This could be bigger than that because the Richard Nixon situation was terrible, and he should have been removed or impeached, but it was involving a political operation. This is one of the most powerful and devastating agencies in the American government, an agency that can completely ruin your life and put you out of business. And if they have deliberately destroyed evidence to cover up political activity, people need to know about it. That is quite dramatic. Now, we don't know that to be the case, but that's why a full investigation is necessary, and unfortunately the IRS is less than cooperative. Well, of course Fox News has covered it, but it would be the lead story in virtually every newspaper in America if this was occurring under George W. Bush. But because it's occurring under Barack Obama, it is either covered as a nuisance or covered as some sort of conspiracy theory on the part of Republicans, not as the legitimate issue that it deserves to be covered as.